Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, Biodiversity and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees and I work for the United Nations Development Program, Asia Pacific. In partnership with the European Union, UNDP is hosting a series of webcasts where we explore the connections between business, human rights, and the environment. You can find all our episodes of Asia in Focus in the description below. Be sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future programs. Now, excitement is running high at the UN Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, Canada. Governments from around the world have convened to agree to a new slate of ambitious biodiversity goals. But what does COP15 mean for Asia, where environmental degradation is occurring at an alarming rate? And what more can government and industry do to protect and respect our right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? But before we get started, let's first check in with my co-host, Sheila Yuan. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Sean. I'm in Bangkok Chau, also known as the Greenland of Bangkok. Today, I will be talking to Dolly Tring, a biodiversity expert at UNDP Asia Pacific. Together, we will be exploring the relationship of nature and sustainable development.
Thank you, Sheila. Now in Asia, rapid economic development and population growth are driving an unprecedented loss of biodiversity. In recent decades, over 600,000 square kilometers of forest have been destroyed in Southeast Asia alone. In the wider Asia-Pacific region, 40% of coral reefs and mangroves have disappeared. What is government and business doing about this crisis? How is biodiversity linked to human rights? And who do we hold responsible for abusing our right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? To provide some insights in the studio, we have Nicole Torres of Parabukas and Golam Sarwar from the University of Dhaka. Joining us from Jakarta is Henriette Færgemann from the European Commission. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Nicole, let me start with you. It's clear to me that many people believe that biodiversity is in crisis in Asia, but the same people also think it's a problem for the future. What do you say to people who believe that biodiversity loss doesn't impact them right now?
Well, biodiversity and healthy ecosystems support so many of the things that we use and need on a daily basis. So if I might make a very concrete example, let's think of a very specific commodity like bananas. So bananas are a favorite breakfast food, but they're also critical to so many livelihoods and to the nutrition of so many communities in Southeast Asia. Particularly Cavendish bananas are grown mainly on monoculture plantations that rely very heavily on chemical inputs like pesticides and fertilizers, and that makes the variety less able to adapt to these forms of fungus and other pathogens that they encounter. And it's not just that. Monoculture plantations like this have traditionally encroached on habitats of species and the traditional territories of indigenous peoples and local communities. Also, this does not just have implications for their rights, but also it's been found that when there is a greater agricultural intensification in this way, there is a greater occurrence and risk of zoonotic and vector-borne diseases, for example, malaria.
So the availability of one of our favorite breakfast fruits, but also the spread of diseases like malaria are two consequences of biodiversity that we're experiencing right now.
Yes, so it's a very interconnected system that has implications for livelihoods, for rights, for our health, and food security.
In a study you wrote in 2020, you said, quote, "International trade drives biodiversity threats, leaving large environmental and social footprints largely in developing nations." And you point to plantations, like banana plantations, pineapple plantations. You say these plantations oriented towards export by large multinational companies are the main culprits. Our current free trade policies and free trade objectives or growth policies and objectives, are they at odds with our biodiversity goals?
Well, it is true that trade has had significant trade-offs for biodiversity in the past, especially for certain commodities like, say, palm oil, timber, beef, or soy. But in the recent years, there's been a greater effort and awareness to address that linkage, to decouple trade from deforestation and land conversion. So we see this at the international level, for example, in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. There might be targets. For example, Target 14 looks at the mainstreaming of biodiversity in productive industries like agriculture, industry, fisheries. Target 15 might require governments to make sure that the private sector or businesses in their countries disclose and are very transparent about the impacts on biodiversity and how they affect rights. We also see this at the private sector level. We see more companies being able to be more receptive to voluntary standards for their operations.
Okay, let me turn that question to you, Sarwar. You're from Bangladesh,
Yep.
and Bangladesh is a middle-income success story. But many have said that a lot of the economic growth in the last 10 years, 12 years, has come at the expense of Bangladesh's very rich natural endowments. Is economic growth incompatible with conservation efforts? Is it incompatible with arresting our efforts to arrest biodiversity loss?
Yeah, thank you. So you see, I mean, this is a very delicate issue to make a balance between the biodiversity protection and economic growth, because you see, increased resource consumption and the polluting emission that results economic growth apparently seems to be incompatible with the protection of biodiversity. But what does that economic growth mean? Does that mean that economic growth is possible without ensuring the well-being of the people and without considering the protection of environment? Probably it is not. The second issue is that you see that why we are exploiting the biodiversity resources, because we fail to underscore the economic benefit or the economic value of the protecting biodiversity. In our context, you see that companies and industries are polluting environmental pollution to a large extent, and they're killing forest and encroaching protected areas, and they remain unaccountable because they are doing development. For the sake of development, they're doing this, but they cannot do it for long, because you see there are some development in international area also. You see there is UNJ, resolution that recognizes the right to clean, safe and sustainable environment. And there is a development of UN guiding principles on business and human rights that the companies and industries must be accountable to respect and protect, and they must provide remedy for causing environmental damages and human rights violations by their corporate actions.
So these are some of the national circumstances that are undermining conservation efforts in some Southeast Asian countries, Bangladesh and others. Why don't we explore now what are some of the external influences at play with regards to biodiversity. Henriette, the European Union is now negotiating its new regulation on deforestation. This is going to have big impacts, as you know, on the palm oil industry, the timber industries, the coffee industries, among others in Asia. What are the top 3 things that we need to know about this new deforestation regulation?
Thank you very much. Yeah, there are basically, the 3 things you need to know is that there are basically 2 requirements in the draft regulation. First of all, that the products, it applies to both products that are imported into the European Union and sold on the European market, and also exported from the European Union. And the 2 requirements are that they have to be legal according to the laws of the country where they come from, and they have to be able to demonstrate with a due diligence statement that they have not come from land that was deforested after a cutoff date of 2020 in 2020. This is the first thing. The second thing is that the reason why we're doing all this, deforestation and forest degradation, is still a major issue across the globe. There was a loss of 420 million hectares of forest worldwide, and this is actually an area larger than the European Union, the whole of the European Union, between 1990 and 2020. And of course, as we know, and as you've already touched upon, deforestation and forest degradation are major drivers of climate change and of biodiversity loss. And I think we all agree that these are 2 of the main challenges of our time. Also, it's important to know that 90% of this deforestation is provoked by expansion of agricultural land, and it's really linked to a very limited number of commodities. So the ones that you mentioned are the ones that are covered by the EU regulation. Rubber is not yet covered, but maybe it will be. And then also that the EU is a major importer of some of these commodities. We import for a value of about 60 billion per year. of the 6 commodities that are covered. And our consumers and our citizens, they tell us very clearly that they do not want this any longer. They don't want to contribute to deforestation across the globe. So, yeah, these are some of the keys.
Now, I've been talking to some business leaders in the region, and this deforestation regulation has many of them feeling anxious. Some of them feeling even angry. Some of them are claiming that this regulation rather will drive up poverty rates in the region and may put smallholder farmers out of business. What is your response to these critics?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that every time we design a new piece of legislation in the EU, it's done actually based on a very thorough analysis. First, a scientific analysis that we call an impact assessment, but also on public consultation. On this particular piece of legislation, it was the second largest public consultation in the entire history of the European Union. I think that tells you something about how important this is to everybody. And there was a reply rate of 1.2 million respondents, and 300,000 of these were from outside the EU. So we have listened to all of these things in the design, and we've analyzed thoroughly about 20 options, which has led to this selected option. So it's not really something that is coming just out of the blue. And also, I hear also the voices that you hear, but I also have to say that we also hear other voices. I mean, for example, just now in September, there was the Indonesian Union of Palm Oil Smallholders. There's one that's called SPKS that sent out a press release on their own initiative saying that they think that actually the regulation is going to be an opportunity for their members. And I mean, if you can just read a small quote, the union assessed that this could be a great opportunity for millions of Indonesian palm oil farmers to benefit from the EU market by providing deforestation-free and traceable palm oil products. And they say that they think that this can give a long-term sustainability to the Indonesian palm oil smallholders. So I think this we have to listen to also.
Henriette, thank you very much for that response. So we covered a lot in this first segment. I want to say thank you very much to our guests today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Nature provides enormous value to us in terms of health and nutrition, economic development, and cultural identity. In fact, experts estimate that ecosystems provide $125 trillion in services to the global economy on a yearly basis. Recognizing this, UNDP and its partners in over 20 countries in Asia are driving ecosystem restoration and regeneration, putting nature at the heart of sustainable development. To explore how, let's first check in with my co-host, Sheila Yuan.
Thank you, Sean. I'm in Bang Krachao along the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. Today, I'm with my UNDP colleague, who is the Senior Technical Advisor with the Biodiversity and Ecosystem team. Hi, Dolly. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me here today.
To start with, would you mind telling us a bit more about yourself and your team?
Sure. So I've been working for over 20 years in environment and natural resource management here in Bangkok and back in my home country, Bhutan. Our team supports countries in the region conserve and protect biodiversity and ecosystems such as forests, wetlands, and oceans, and secure the livelihoods of millions of people that depend on them.
Dolly, many people see biodiversity in Asia is in crisis. From your perspective, how bad is it?
Sheila, indeed, Asia Pacific is at the center of the biodiversity crisis. On the one hand, we are the most megadiverse region. At least half of all global biodiversity hotspots are found in the region. 7 out of 17 megadiverse countries are in the region. Yet we are facing multiple crises of nature loss, climate change, poverty, pollution, and inequality. The figures are indeed troubling. Since 1970, in just one lifetime, around 55% of wildlife population has been lost in the region. At least 40% of coral reefs and 60% of mangroves have been lost. Around 5 to 15 million tons of plastic have entered the ocean, damaging marine ecosystems and species. Biodiversity loss and inaction on climate change are in fact considered two of the gravest risks facing humanity. Ignoring and neglecting the importance of biodiversity is putting our own lives in danger. That's why at UNDP, we are putting nature at the heart of our development agenda.
The statistics definitely sound alarming. How is UNDP putting the nature at the center of sustainable development?
UNDP's new nature strategy aims to position nature as the foundation of human well-being and prosperity. We aim to achieve this through three systemic shifts: changing the global narrative on nature, economic and finance shift, and policy and practice shifts. Let me give you one example. In Fiji, UNDP has partnered with the government, sister UN agencies, and the private sector and NGOs to protect the coral reefs. By developing reef-friendly businesses and livelihood activities, we are preventing the marine pollution that is coming from overflowing landfills and leaching of synthetic fertilizers.
From your point of view, how will this year's COP15 make a difference?
Sheila, this decade is our last and best chance to turn the tide against loss and degradation of biodiversity. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that will be agreed at the COP will provide both the ambition and the context for actions to transform our relationship with nature. We need a positive final agreement that is ambitious enough to stop the decline of nature, but clear enough to make the targets achievable. For all of us, this is the time to turn our rhetoric into action.
So Dolly, any final particular message you would like to share with the businesses and government in the region?
Yes, Sheila. Transforming society's relationship with nature requires all hands on deck. From the governments, we need the high political will to agree on the global biodiversity framework. From business and private sector, we need their support to align their operations towards more nature-positive outcomes.
Thank you, Dolly, for your time and for this very insightful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now back to the studio, Sean.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm now joined by Dr. Beria Leimona from World Agroforestry and Rizwana Hasan from the Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Dr. Beria, let me start with you. You seem to be skeptical about sustainability certification. Should we believe in the promise of these sustainability labels that we see on the shelf, or is it just a way of gaming public opinion and buying habits?
I think we need to understand first what is the certification means, right? And then who are being certified, right? So in this case, many big corporations, they have plantations that are having more opportunity to be certified compared to the smallholders who are maybe in their practices meets also similar sustainability standards. The transaction costs for joining certification scheme are high. Yeah, it means that not all smallholders can afford being certified.
Now, on balance, the smaller companies or smallholder farmers, are they being hurt by certification branding because they don't have the access to those markets or to those consumers?
When farmers are being joining the certification scheme, one of their expectations is to gain a higher income. Yeah, for example, if you sell your cacao or coffee bean only one US dollar per kg, I just make it up the number. By involving in certification market, they hope that you can sell it by $2, yeah, or maybe 1.5, even a couple dollars higher. However, unfortunately, yeah, this hasn't been happened yet. It means that the income gain from certification scheme are quite limited. Yeah, the promise is only that some smallholder they mentioned that they get non-financial benefits, like for sure capacity building from the non-government organization. They get networks by involving in many stakeholders during the certification process.
But that's the limit of it.
Exactly.
I see. Let me ask you this. all of us, billions of us, benefit from ecosystem services. It's in the hundreds of trillions of dollars estimates run. But the last State of Biodiversity report for Asia and the Pacific says that we've moved away from our biodiversity targets. We're not achieving them. And in addition to this, we are ignoring the needs of women, indigenous, local communities, the poor, and the vulnerable. But maybe it's clear to us why this other group, like indigenous peoples, should be identified, because their lives directly depend on the viability of forests or ocean resources. But are their interests always the same as, for example, the poor or these other groups that we've lumped into this category of vulnerables?
We need to doing inclusive to the views of indigenous people, and also understand what are the needs of the poor themselves, right? So it means that because the argument is that when we are talking in the indigenous people, so they have a certain view on conservation and biodiversity, how the conservations are become their cultural identity, right? In this case, maybe in this case that the interventions towards financial or financing scheme are somehow underestimate their cultural
The
views.
true value to them
Exactly.
because of the cultural factor, which is hard to enumerate,
Exactly.
isn't it?
While for the poor, for example, they may appreciate more development funds to increase their livelihood before they also engage in any conservation efforts or activities.
Rizwana, what about in South Asia? Can you give us a concrete example of how we're reversing biodiversity loss there?
In South Asia, we have seen some of our judiciary coming up with real progressive interpretation of law. In most part of South Asia, although our constitutions do not recognize right to environment as a fundamental right, the judiciary has come forward. The judiciaries in different South Asian countries have interpreted the constitutional right to life as broad enough to include right to environment. In Bangladesh, the High Court has said that rivers have to be considered, have to be respected, have to be protected as legal persons, as legal entities. So if you do any harm to the rivers, those who are responsible for protecting the river will be held accountable. So if the businesses continue polluting our rivers, the government will be held responsible for not punishing the business houses.
The Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly recently, separately, recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Is this international recognition going to move the needle at the national level in Bangladesh or elsewhere, or is it mostly just a symbolic gesture?
These are very positive developments, and we have seen that after the Rio Declaration, many countries have amended their constitution to include that term environment. So with such recognition at the international level, if the states who would be signing on these resolutions take it seriously, come back home and amend their constitutions to recognize environmental right as fundamental right, make it something enforceable, give a tool, a weapon to the hands of the communities who are suffering from environmental degradation, I think that will be a very major and significant step forward.
What about your hopes for COP15 though? What do you expect out of it? What do you think is the most important thing about it?
As an environmental justice advocate, I want the UN to be very clear that people should be given their right to environment. People should be, provided with tools so that they can fight back injustices. Ecocide, crime against environment, is defined. Environmental human rights defenders are given adequate legal protection. I think that we have no chance to fail this opportunity. There has to be a global agenda set so that the will of biodiversity degradation is reversed.
We are not meeting any of the targets that were set by the Aichi targets set by the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're actually going in reverse in many places and on several targets, if not all the targets. Well, let's go back to you, Dr. Beria. Is there any concrete examples that give someone like me hope that we can turn the tide on biodiversity loss?
Yeah, I would like to refer to my country lessons. Yeah, so there is a report currently published mentioning that Indonesia's agenda toward zero emissions on oil palm cultivation somehow is well progressing. Yeah, so and then also domestically in Indonesia, the government has been quite active in promoting the ISPO, the Indonesian Standard for Palm Oil. Yeah, so this is like a bridging from the RSPO, the Roundtable for Palm Oil Sustainability, so which is being published internationally, right? So the efforts to ensure that something locally and nationally adopted are kind of promising in this case. Yeah, if I add a bit, it's also about the financing scheme, right? So if in Indonesia we also have an agenda for promoting what's so-called the ecological fiscal transfer, right? Meaning that providing incentives for the subnational government who implies the sustainable and green growth agenda within their development plan.
What about either in Bangladesh or elsewhere in Asia?
In South Asia, we can definitely see progress around forest management. Community forest management is getting popular there. In Bangladesh, in Nepal, and in India, we have seen that where communities are heavily involved and are empowered to manage the forest, they are actually protecting the forest from being depleted. We are also seeing people demanding rights for nature.
Who's demanding rights?
The communities are demanding rights for nature, and this effort is actually taking forward the commitment that we had in the World Charter for Nature for according specific rights to nature.
So you're saying the politics are changing?
The politics are changing, and I can see that there is a transformation agenda on the table, which the youth are taking forward.
Well, with that, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate all your responses to these questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that has been our program, Asia in Focus, Biodiversity and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. Many thanks to our partners at the European Union and our guests. I hope you want to learn more by visiting our website and subscribing to our channel. Here you can find other episodes on climate change, water pollution, and air pollution. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so please leave your comments in the section below. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.